Welcome to the Field Lab podcast. We know that you're all here because you're passionate about health, learning about true health. Maybe it's keeping your health, maybe it's finding your health, maybe it's helping someone else with their health. We all have different reasons why we're here. If you run a human day connected to a really good environment that's filled with light, water, magnetism, that's filled with love and community, that is how humans default to health. Every day, women come to me in a moment of crisis, told by a doctor, influencer, or Google search that their abnormal menstrual cycle, poor energy, altered mood, difficulty sleeping, or inability to lose weight means only one thing: perimenopause. They want to feel better, but they're also questioning, should this transition be so challenging? Is that normal? Is there something I can do about it? But that is only layer number one. The perimenopause conversation has a second layer that needs to be discussed, a trend I find troubling. Those who identify as being in perimenopause are getting younger and younger. I see this as a representation of the current health state of humans living in an artificial environment, disconnected from the daily cycles that control biologic rhythms and how that's altering the future of fertility. To me, this is a wake-up call that something needs to change. Here is our bold statement. Biophysics always precedes biochemistry. Perimenopause isn't just a hormone story. Neither is the solution. Perimenopause, especially in younger women, is a loss of connection to source, a loss of proper timekeeping. This is driving biophysical failure and the collapse of redox potential. It's a decision to turn off fertility in an environment where the biophysics are failing, but it can be corrected by restoring the biophysics of your environment and, as a byproduct, you. In part one, we'll talk about perimenopause through the lens of timekeeping, circadian rhythms, fertility, biophysics, and the changing modern environment. In part two, which is available only to members, I talk about the labs I use, how I evaluate them, and the action steps you can take to reconnect with true health. If you'd like to hear that episode, become a member using the link in the show notes. Now, let's dive into the conversation.
So I'm just gonna have fun with this one. Learn along, learn along with everybody else, because I'm certainly no expert in this subject, but it's one we really get lots of questions around. Another super hot topic that everybody, not everybody, most only women are super interested in, but perimenopause comes up quite a bit. So where did that really come from?
Yes, a fun one that, I know it's hard because you don't have personal context, but I know you work with quite a bit of our patients who are always discussing then perimenopause, how to understand it, how to treat it. And so it's a it's a complex conversation,
Mhm.
mostly because I think we should start right off the bat where perimenopause wasn't really even something that I was taught in medical school. It's not even really something I saw a ton of in my 20-year ago practice. But like the reality is, we basically have any patient who's female from around age 20 until they are in menopause. Like, this is a hot conversation
Mhm.
that many women that come into our practice ask about analyzing hormones, understanding hormones, because they're having issues. Like, this is real that there are women who are not in menopause, so they are menstruating, but they're not having what's considered a normal monthly cycle.
Okay.
Very important topic
Mhm.
because in 20 years for sure, it's gone from most women, I would say, a majority of women had normal cycles. From the time they started their menstrual cycle until they were in menopause, unless they had babies, they would have a monthly cycle. It would stay pretty regular and maybe a
It's
little
no issue.
PMS, but really a non-issue.
Mhm.
20 years later, it's actually quite the majority of women, and of course, I'm not seeing only healthy people.
Right.
So and it's important that, we're generally working with a population of people who have diseases or symptoms that they're trying to treat. We generally don't have patients that come in saying, "I'm 100% healthy. I've got no issues. I want to be preventative." So I will say that we are normally working with people who are not running the normal health redox state.
Mhm.
So now it quite appears that perimenopause, which is just this broad term of not having a normal menstrual experience.
Is that the only symptom, or are there other things that
It's
fit
everything.
into that
Yeah, I
picture?
mean, it's just everything.
Mm.
Yeah, it's bloating, it's
Yeah, I've heard
mood, it's
energy, fatigue,
energy, it's
yeah.
pain, it's like it's
It's like this
kind of
constellation of
a big catch-all. The reality, though, is that, the women are really experiencing abnormal menstrual cycles, so they can normally pinpoint changes throughout the month that are synced to cycle, so they can tie, like, I'm more bloated at certain points of the cycle. So, I mean, it's an easy health issue to then collaborate with and experience. If you're the woman with perimenopause, you see this reality for yourself that now it's just trickling into the entire health of you
okay.
or the lack of health of you.
Mhm.
So now there's just this constellation of perimenopause symptoms that, of course, a patient wants to treat because you generally don't feel well. So I think it's important to say, like, this is definitely a real phenomenon. Absolutely a real phenomenon. I mean, I have young 20 somethings who come in now because they don't have normal cycles for they have tons of symptoms around it. They want to have children someday, so they're afraid that they will have infertility. I mean,
Mhm.
in 20 years, the way of thinking about menstrual cycle has done a complete 180, at least what I'm seeing in my practice, which I am sure if you're a clinical doctor, you've also seen this in the last 20 years if you're working with females,
Mhm.
which is unfortunate because, I think we're going to talk about how to start thinking about this differently because ultimately, what's the solution here? When you're thinking about this medically, the solution is pretty minimal.
Right.
So let's like talk about that because I think there's a potentially some historical. I'm going to give you my insight historically as to how I think we got here, but also why now there's a lot of confusion about what you do
Mhm.
about perimenopause, and then treating it can oftentimes make the symptoms better. So that's the other trick of the story is that if you don't understand biophysics, but you do understand that perimenopause is your biochemistry gone bad, if you don't understand biophysics, then your only solution is to treat the bad biochemistry,
Right.
which is again like why we're having this
Right.
conversation is that we really want to invite
Mhm.
people to think about a bigger option here.
Mhm.
That it's the harder option,
For sure.
it's the one that will take longer and may not give you quick answers, but it's ultimately the only option that is truly for health.
Right. I think that's where we should go next. Like, why in our modern environment would the cycle start to get irregular and things start to go wrong? What's missing?
Right. So then let's like think very simply at the biophysical level that biophysics before biochemistry is always the way we think. So when you're running a symptom or a set of symptoms through that health perspective, then you have to think, well, if I've got hormones that have gone bad, why at the biophysical level has that gone bad? And
Mhm.
ultimately, it's a pretty easy answer that it means the circadian regulation of those hormones has lost its timekeeping.
Okay.
What tells the body what to do at the right time, what tells your cells when to produce hormones, how to regulate these hormones is absolutely driven by your biophysical state, and that is running on proper timekeeping.
Mhm.
So if you have been following along with us, it's really easy to realize that almost perfectly you can look in our environment and simply understand that from 2007, all of a sudden now we're just in this LED phone in your hand state where in 20 years we have changed the circadian timekeeping. We have changed, therefore, the regulation of these hormones. And now, without the circadian control, everything goes into estrogen dominance.
Mhm.
Everything goes into pro growth. And that's really what most women are starting to feel and experience, which could be more broad without an endometriosis or a PCOS diagnosis, but it could be all linked together.
Mhm.
There could be endometriosis and infertility and perimenopause, like in a spectrum. And it's really tragic that it has to be because it doesn't have to be in a life connected to the decentralized network of nature,
Right.
but it is when the day is disconnected from that.
Mhm.
And how this shows up in a female menstrual cycle is actually one of the most clear ways we can see how centralization of our day and our timekeeping ruins human health.
Right. And we're ultimately talking about fertility here, right? Maybe that's
At the end of the day, this
yeah.
comes down to, why is a female body running a fertility cycle? I mean,
Mhm.
a menstrual cycle, it's for having a baby.
Right.
So
So in an environment where biophysics have failed, the body's kind of trying to purposefully prevent fertility to protect the mother and then the next, obviously the baby.
exactly.
Okay.
It's a very good protection mechanism
Mhm.
that why would a female body want to, or I should say, not that it wants to, but how could a female body produce another life
Mhm.
if there's failure of biophysics? There's literally not enough energy to do that.
So is that a redox collapse as well?
Redox collapse, the
Mhm.
pinnacle of redox collapse is not being able to have fertility,
Right.
but ultimately it goes back to an abnormal cycle
Mhm.
is quite proof of that. Now, I think 20 years ago, how I would see it normally play out was that in the time right before menopause, there could be a moment where there were skip cycles, some irregularity. That was what I would see normally.
Mhm.
So a woman would go from her monthly cycle, and then typically in that year or so before actual menopause, things were starting to shift with her cycle. And I think that is sort of where this mindset around prevention came in. And then it started expanding for women where it went from just right before menstrual cycle to kind of slowly bleeding into all of the time. And now 20 years later, it's kind of the entire phase before menopause. And now this becomes something that's quite treatable.
Yeah, what are the conventional treatments? What's offered? What are
Yes, I mean, most patients come into me now thinking, I have perimenopause.
Mhm.
They know their reality. And a lot of times the story is that they've gone to their regular doctor, asked for, because now anywhere on the internet, you're going to see that you need to check your hormones.
Mhm.
So, probably functional medicine has done a really good job trying to teach people that you've got a hormone problem. You probably have an estrogen dominance problem, and you need to test for that. Now, is that really the right answer when the solution that's most likely being offered is either conventional medicine will say HRT, functional medicine will often say bioidentical HRT or supplements, but that's really the pool of solutions.
Mhm.
And I think for me in practice, it got to the point where it's a lot of band-aiding.
Right.
And most definitely, this kind of comes back to 2020 where I know for myself in practicing with patients is I had that moment of thinking, well, like, what if that supplement is no longer being produced or is available to these patients? Because I'm not going to say that there aren't really good band-aids that
Mhm.
work. I mean, there are some supplemental combinations I've used throughout my whole practice where sometimes you've done everything right, circadian, health-wise, and life is still really miserable, so you need a little Band-Aid in the short term. Like, I'm not saying that this is like you must suffer. However, it is important to realize if you can't get better, what's the reason why? And that tells you you still don't have good circadian control of your light and dark cycles.
Mhm.
But this again comes back to in 2020, it was very clear to me that this was a symptom picture that if we didn't have the Band-Aids, I didn't have a strong perspective of like, how would you help people? How would I help people?
Right.
Now, again, I see it so differently,
Mhm.
and it really helped me to go back into my historical career and try to think, well, why did I have women who seem to go right through their menstrual cycle history and menopause and no problem? And then why did that seem like it increased? It wasn't just because we had a name for it, it was because it was actually happening.
Mhm.
And then now we kind of have some interesting science where we know like there's like it was an interesting like indigenous cultures study that was done on I forgot which native culture it was, but like the women didn't even have a name. It wasn't even in their native language
Interesting.
for menopause because they just went from cycling to not cycling.
Mhm.
And it wasn't anything that was problematic.
Right.
And I can definitely say I have tons of patients, but those are my older patients
Yeah, will
who
that be
had
true anymore?
good circadian function.
Right.
And then once that starts going, then it can really be a challenge.
Mhm.
So I think it's important then to like, yeah, go the next step of if you've lived a lifestyle that's disconnected you from day and night, one place where that redox failure, that biophysical failure will show up is most definitely in your menstrual cycle.
Okay.
And now it could show up in different ways.
Mhm.
It's just really important to understand this so that way you can step back and make a more informed decision.
Mhm.
It may very well be that you choose the HRT.
Right.
It may very well be that you choose the bioidentical HRT. It may be that you choose a supplement. It, these are choices that are absolutely possible to make, but then that is a choice that you're making to treat the biochemistry. Maybe you do that to get by
Mhm.
until your biophysics comes back because it may take years for that to return if you've disconnected. And I want to be mindful of I have a lot of patients who it's tragic to have some of the symptoms that come along with it.
Right.
It's terrible when you can't sleep all night.
Mhm.
So you just have to understand it for your context. But I have seen the hope on the other side is I've seen so many women who realize like once we work together, we're then evaluating the circadian side of things. It's always poor
Mhm.
in these women. and plugging into a lifestyle that can help reconnect you to those light and dark cycles, understanding the most critical times of controlling that reproductive phase being the morning light. Like when you add back in those actual practices, it's a game changer for hormones.
Right.
I mean, I've had patients who have been diagnosed like early menopause, and those were inaccurate diagnoses once they added
Comes
that
back.
in circadian practices. And that's
Mhm.
happened, more than a surprising amount of times,
Mhm.
which makes sense to me because of course, a body that's failing biophysically would then turn off fertility, maybe to the point where there isn't estrogen or progesterone production. Maybe there's feedback on the pituitary and FSH and LH are high. It could look menopausal, but it's technically circadian dysfunction, which is what I always tell
Mm.
patients, like, if you're not wanting to have a baby, you make sure you prevent,
Mhm.
because oftentimes you could churn back on that fertility cycle, and that can return you back to normal,
Right.
which I think most people want.
Right. Yeah. Could long-term use of something like HRT or bioidentical hormones be troublesome in the long term?
The answer is we don't know,
Yeah, okay.
right? I
Yeah.
mean, we don't know, but
Right.
I think there's quite a bit of a story of course, like birth control.
Yeah, I was gonna ask about that
Yeah, I
next.
mean, that's hard to vet out fully because, at least in our culture, so many females have used birth control without thinking twice about it.
Mhm.
So it, I'm sure, is playing into the deeper story as to why things have gone poorly. Some of those birth controls work by purposely
Circadian.
disrupting the circadian biology.
Mhm.
Theoretically, like copper IUDs, this is how they actually work
Mhm.
when you understand transition metals and biophysics. It's helpful to understand that maybe if you've taken birth control and you're having perimenopausal symptoms, that you need to think about your circadian biology in the treatment of your case.
Right. Absolutely.
So it's complex because most women now who are in this perimenopausal state have a lot of these modern influences that
Mhm.
are sort of multiply on each other,
Mhm.
right? They've 20 years lived this modern lifestyle, and then light and darkness, not heeding those signals, probably birth control, other things that can impact the circadian regulation. And now you start thinking like, it's no surprise why menstrual cycles in women are no longer just normal monthly
I mean,
cycles.
how could it be?
How could it be? Which is why I have 20-year-olds coming in thinking, I'm probably going to be infertile. Like
Mm.
this is that's kind of a brand new thing. Maybe last year was the first time I had a patient who came in because she was expecting she would have infertility. She was getting married, and her several of her friends who had already were ahead of her
Mhm.
had trouble getting pregnant.
Right.
And I really thought to myself, wow, in 20 years, we've gone from really no woman being concerned
Mhm.
about infertility to now most young women being concerned
I mean,
about
I
it.
hear it all the time,
Yeah.
and even choosing IVF, like, very early in the process, just assuming that it's not salvageable.
True.
Yeah.
Which is hard because our model is we have a our
Right.
conventional model, our functional medicine model is like, we've got a solution for you.
Mhm.
That if you test it, we can treat it. But remember, testing it only shows you the biochemistry side. You need to either have awareness around the biophysics so you can understand it, or have somebody who is aware to help you understand it. Like, I would never run a reproductive hormone panel without an adrenal stress index,
Mhm.
without DHA sulfate, without understanding things like vitamin D, without cholesterol production,
Mhm.
without pregnenolone. Like when you weave that story together, you see the biophysics gone bad, and it allows you to be way more actionable around it versus thinking actually that your only solution is to take something. But again, the trap there is, what if those start being regulated differently?
Mhm.
What if there's a pandemic and you don't have access to the raw materials? Like, what if you're thinking about the what if, or possibly you're just trying to decentralize your life?
Mhm. Yeah, you don't want
That's
that.
happened recently too, where I've had some patients who are like more in the decentralized thinking space, and they say, I feel better
Right.
on these hormones, yet I do not want to be tied to having to take something every day. If I travel, I need to pack these things in my bag. Do I have to worry about if they're confiscated at the airport? I mean,
Mhm.
these are real things you want to think about. And then it does make you think differently if you are trying to be decentralized in your life,
Mhm.
in your thinking, that it kind of forces you to start thinking about biophysics.
100%. So beyond testing, are there some action steps you'd recommend if somebody feels like they kind of fit this context and want to make some changes?
Yeah, so I mean, I think the real talk is you must put some learning toward circadian biology, but like true circadian biology, biophysics based. This
Mhm.
is not just, go outside and think you're going to be well, because that is not how it will work. In
Yes.
fact, I've had patients come in and say, well, I'm doing all the light right, but I still feel poorly.
Mhm.
And that reveals that, unfortunately, the science is a little more complex than just going outside.
And I find that a lot of the circadian influencers, it's all leptin, 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 and there's no, like obviously, leptin is super important, and it drives a lot of this story, but they don't really give you anything besides leptin, leptin, it's like just that word over and over again,
Yes, yeah, and
which
so
is probably a deeper.
yeah, we should kind of pull it together in the deeper biophysics, because yes,
That's important.
leptin resistance is at the root of this story.
Mhm.
However, it's because of the failure of the biophysics.
Right.
So that all gets wrapped together. But then, yeah, what's the action here?
Mhm.
The action is not that you treat leptin,
Right.
you treat the hormones. The reality is you can treat the hormones and oftentimes feel better.
Mhm.
So, that's
It's
the
kind of the
w-
trap,
the
really.
way of thinking about it is a trap,
Mhm.
unfortunately, like
Right.
how we see it. It doesn't mean that you can't make those choices. I want to be clear with that, because I mean, I
Yeah,
definitely
everybody's
have
got
had patients
choices.
that come in, we've worked together, and this is not for them.
Mhm.
Like the story of rebuilding their health over time is not for them, and that's okay.
Right.
This is definitely not for everyone.
Right. It takes work.
But if you are starting to identify more with decentralizing your life and
Mhm.
thinking about those larger themes, then this is a big one if you're a female, and if you're a female before menopause. And, that we'll do another episode on menopause, because that's a topic as well,
Mhm.
as to why menopause now is also similarly problematic.
Mhm.
And again, it could trap you into treating these things for an entire life, where if you just plug into correcting your circadian biology, it might take time,
Right.
but it eventually can help you live a healthier life
Mhm.
in your future self
Yeah, it's like it's
as
the
we
time
progress.
preference conversation, like you said,
Yeah.
and treating this like like a check engine light. Like, you might be able to resolve some of your symptoms now, but what are you masking in the now that might unfortunately manifest in the future, and
Yes.
what bigger issues could occur?
Yeah. So it's like you want to pay attention.
Yeah.
Ultimately, you don't want to just take a pill
Right.
and ignore it.
Mhm.
It definitely tells you something bigger, it's also a really good way to track progress.
Mhm.
I've had so many patients be able to then use that as more of like a real time metric of every month it can get better. Maybe there's some seasonal fluctuation, but you start seeing that. You start seeing that it's better in the summer, maybe worse coming off of winter. And then when you are able to enlighten now your thinking as a circadian year, then all of a sudden you realize like the menstrual cycle is a powerful feedback tool to help you gauge how you're doing with your decentralized day.
Mhm.
So it's a gift when
Sure.
you see it that way, which then I think, we don't want to go again, like go too deep into the science part, but hopefully that's a practical, I think that's a practical way to end this part one.
How did I do?
That was
Alright.
good. No, I know. Noah's now learning to be a perimenopause thinker.
Perfect.
Perimenopause is quite a reflection of a biophysical issue in our modern times. Now, we see that really stretched out, as early 20s. Many women now are being challenged with having normal monthly cycles. You see so many more patients identifying with perimenopause, but really it's just the loss of biophysics within the female design.
Mhm.
The unfortunate reality is that you have to get morning light, and it needs to be without wearing makeup, without putting contacts in, without some of the more challenging things that are normalized. Our worst perimenopause cases are those that have infertility built into the story. I've never had a case where there isn't some burying of sunlight. Either it's wearing makeup, often contact. The hope on the other side of it is that if you're following along and starting to adopt better practices in your lifestyle that are biophysics based, you can quickly restore fertility cycles if you know better.